together for the annual review and submission to CIHR, but to let you know that in every province virtually there are Can-SOLVE programs of work, numerous projects, different people, including our patient partners and policymakers. And so we really have had a major impact, and each province has their own fact sheet, if you will, which I ask you to go to the website and have a look at when you want. Next slide. So many of you have been with us from the beginning, some of you have not. In 2016, we were awarded the grant, which ends in terms of funding phase in 21-22. However, we just received a note from CIHR that due to COVID and other things, we will actually be having that funding envelope extended to 2023. But you remember the vision is that every Canadian with or at high risk for chronic kidney disease will receive the best recommended care, experience optimal outcomes, and have the opportunity to participate in studies of innovative treatments, regardless of age, sex, gender, location, or ethnicity. Next. So what we've done in this year 4 is we've actually formed the Patient Governance Council, which is and the first in-person and maybe the last in-person meeting for a while was October of 2019. We actually have developed and launched some of the infrastructure required to really sustain this network. Very important in COVID times, was even more important pre-COVID perhaps, and maybe put us in a very interesting position. But we have a KidneyLink platform, and we've reimagined and launched the Canadian Nephrology Trials Network with new committee structure that's very inclusive of patients, our policymakers, researchers, and different areas of expertise. There are a number of different initiatives for training and mentorship, and they're listed here. And in the interest of time, I won't go through them, but I think it's really important to call out the Wabishki Bishno Sakanj Learning Pathway, the Indigenous Research Ethics and Protocol module, and our recent Knowledge Keepers gathering also in October of 2019. And that we continue to publish on the research that we're doing, both in terms of protocols as well as processes that we've used to get us to this point. Next slide. So we've also begun to think about the future, because whether it's 2022 or 2023 that this funding runs out, and we do need to think about Can-SOLVE 2.0. And so we have a sustainability planning committee that's been formed with, again, broad representation of the network stakeholders. We had a first meeting in November, and we have a workshop planned for June 26th to actually start to have more conversations around what does 2.0 look like, how will we fund and put together the funding proposals, and what will we do for the next phase of the network to demonstrate growth and sustainability. Next slide. We're trying to engage with all of the different provincial support units to identify opportunities for collaboration and synergy. They have also been given a remit that they need to work with the national networks, and that was important because that way we can combine our efforts and potentially have synergies and amplification of many of the activities that we're doing. I don't have to tell this audience the impact that COVID-19 has had in creating delays in not just the renewal process, but in a lot of our programs of work as well. All that being said, next slide. We do have to thank all of our funding partners who have continued to work with us through these different and difficult times to truly understand and appreciate how to continue to gather momentum and continue to fund and support the projects and the investigators. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Jim Scully from the University of Toronto and UHN, and he's going to introduce you to the poster presentations, but hopefully on that background, the poster presentations will give you some more food for thought. So thank you. Jim.
Thanks a bunch, dear. It's a real pleasure to have a opportunity to host these presentations. I've been looking forward to them for a couple of reasons. The first, of course, it's a real nice opportunity for us all to hear about some important Can-SOLVE CKD updates, but also because in some respects, this kind of interaction may well be a window into the future, a future that's been molded by COVID-19. And I think the format is one that we're going to continue to work with. I think today's presentations, which were originally designed to be presented at the CSN meetings in Halifax, really divide into two broad categories. The first two presentations will focus on critical Can-SOLVE CKD infrastructure that is enabling of kidney research in Canada, and focuses on educating and training new researchers, both physicians and patients in partnership. And the second two presentations really speak to the foundations of Can-SOLVE CKD. They speak indeed to our core principles, and that's engagement with patient partners to enhance research in Canada, and indeed for us all to learn and enhance our cultural sensitivity to issues that in the Indigenous communities. So I think a real treat to hear about these activities. Each of the presentations will be 7 minutes in length, and I will introduce each one, and then we'll have a question and answer period following the completion of all 4 presentations. And we look forward and invite your participation in any capacity as a member of the Can-SOLVE CKD community. We're keen to hear feedback and delight in the conversations that ensue from these kinds of presentations. So our first presentation is entitled The Canadian Nephrology Trials Network, a new vision for nephrology trials in Canada. And the presentation will be from Alicia Murdoch. Alicia is a project coordinator within the Can-SOLVE CKD team in Vancouver, and she's been very busy and active in coordinating the activities of the redesigned CNTN. So we look forward to hearing from you. Alicia, please tell us about CNTN.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, as you said, my name is Alicia Murdoch. I am a project coordinator with Can-SOLVE, and the bulk of my work has been with the operationalizing the CNTN. And so this morning I'm going to talk to you about our poster, A New Vision for Nephrology Trials in Canada. Next slide, please. So this is our poster. You may or may not have seen this already. The authors on this poster include myself, as well as the CNTN Executive Committee co-chairs, Drs. Prashva Mador and Karthik Tenankor, and patient partners Dwight Sparks and Hans Vorster, as well as Dr. Rita Suri, who was one of the founders of the CNTN and the chair at the time of the workshop that I will be discussing. Next slide, please. So the Canadian Nephrology Trials Network, or CNTN, was created in 2014 in response to an identified need to improve the quantity and quality of clinical trials in nephrology in Canada. In 2016, CNTN received funding from the newly created Can-SOLVE CKD network, and a vision workshop was held in September 2018 to determine how CNTN could expand its mandate. Today, the network is working towards moving forward the goals set out at the Vision Network. Next slide. So in July and August of 2018, 2 surveys were distributed, one to researchers, that is the members of CNTN, as well as members of the Canadian Society of Nephrology. And a second survey was sent to the Can-SOLVE CKD patient partners, asking about the perceived strengths and weaknesses of the network. The survey was completed by 41 researchers and 6 patient partners, and the results of these surveys helped to form the agenda for the 2-day workshop, which included presentations on the survey results both from the researcher and patient partner perspectives, a presentation on an environmental scan completed of other research networks, a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, or SWOT analysis, and guided questions for small group discussions that were later brought to a larger group for discussion. The workshop was attended by 22 researchers, 10 patient partners, the Can-SOLVE CKD operations team, as well as representatives from other stakeholder groups, such as the Kidney Foundation of Canada and the Ontario Renal Network. Next slide. After the workshop, a report was created that collated all of the comments, responses, and ideas from the 2 days of discussion. 3 key themes emerged, which led to the creation of 3 working committees that you see here on your screen. A call was put out in February 2018 to the CNTN membership and Can-SOLVE CKD Patient Council for committee members, and in April 2019, the committees began to meet monthly. Each committee is co-led by a patient partner and a researcher, and each committee has between 5 and 8 members. The network's patient partners have been leaders in these committees and have helped researchers to hear the patient voice within the network. We have the Capacity Building Committee, which is working to increase the number of people and resources available to researchers to conduct clinical trials in Canada, and to increase the number of research ideas or questions being developed both by physicians and patients. The Scientific Operations Committee is working to increase the quality of research proposals submitted for funding through quality peer review, as well as pre- and post-review support. The Communications and Engagement Committee is working to increase the exposure of CNTN to the nephrology community and across Canada, thereby increasing membership to facilitate more collaboration with academic centers and non-academic or community centers, and help keep the nephrology community informed about what is happening in research. There is also an executive committee for the overall strategic leadership and governance of the network, and this committee includes the co-leads from each of the working committees, as well as 6 additional CNTN members at large. Next slide, please. So in its first year, the Communications and Engagement Committee has created a quarterly newsletter, to highlight research being done by our network members, their recent publications, events, and noteworthy news. The committee has also created a survey that was going to be released in March, but has been put on hold due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The Capacity Building Committee created and presented a webinar series to educate and encourage patient partners to develop their own research ideas and present them to our network at our biannual in-person meetings. And we are developing a hub and spoke model to help connect community sites that want to participate in research to potential collaborators at larger academic institutions. The Scientific Operations Committee continues to conduct peer review and is developing a post-competition support program for researchers who are not successful in securing funds. During this pandemic, we have also updated the website to include ways in which we are working to help the network during this time by curating a list of COVID-19 research resources for researchers, including granting opportunities. The network also wrote several letters of support for its members who were submitting proposals to the CIHR COVID-19 rapid response grants. Having these smaller working committees means that the network can be nimble and can respond quickly to change, as seen with the pandemic when the Scientific Operations Committee members were able to quickly respond to the CIHR call for COVID-19 proposals. And with a patient partner already on the committee, the patient voice was included from the beginning. And last slide, please.
Thank you.
Just a little bit more. Sorry. CNTN hopes to continue to promote a culture of collaboration, increase its membership, and offer its members support in research with the ultimate goal of improving the quality and quantity of nephrology clinical trials in Canada. This is a screenshot you'll see of our website, CNTN, and I would encourage anyone who is interested in learning more about the network or join the network to go to the site, or you can follow us on Twitter. Yeah, so I'd just like to say thank you again to my co-authors and the CNTN Executive Committee for their input on this poster.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Alicia. We'll move on now to our second presentation today, which is entitled KidneyLink and KidneyPro, online resources to enhance patient engagement in kidney research. The presentation will be by Graham Pollock, who is our communication manager for this Can-SOLVE CKD network. I think someone that we all engage with at regular intervals. So Graham, please begin your presentation.
Thanks very much, Jim. I'm very pleased to be presenting today about two online tools that we've developed at Can-SOLVE CKD, KidneyLink and KidneyPro, that are part of our efforts to enhance patient engagement in kidney research across Canada. I'll be presenting on behalf of the two working groups that developed these tools, and my co-authors are acknowledged at the bottom of this slide. I'd also just like to acknowledge that both of these tools were developed entirely in-house, and so it took a great deal of work to create them and bring them to fruition. And we're very grateful for all the efforts contributed from a wide range of our colleagues, including our patient partners, network staff, researchers, and clinicians. Next slide, please. So here you see the poster that was accepted to the Canadian Society of Nephrology AGM. We're very grateful to our CSN partners that this work was accepted, and for the opportunity to share it with you today. So I'll be walking you through the key highlights of the poster over the next few slides. Next slide, please. So as a network, one of our primary goals is to increase patient involvement in kidney health research. And in the course of our first several years, we identified several barriers to achieving this goal. One is that health research, as you well know, comes with its own terminology, processes, and practices that are not always widely understood among the general public. And in some cases, these factors can be actual impediments to having patients become involved in research, or perhaps can even just be deterrents in that some people may think they don't have the ability to take part. And a second challenge is that even for those who are willing and able to participate, it's often difficult to know where to begin and what opportunities may exist and where to access them. Next slide, please. So to that end, Can-SOLVE CKD has developed these two tools, KidneyLink and KidneyPro, that aim to break down these barriers that we've identified and empower patients to cultivate the skills, to take part in research, and the awareness to know where and how to get involved. Next slide, please. The platforms ultimately support our network mandate, which is to make kidney research more accessible to all Canadians. Next slide. Thank you. So I'll give you a brief introduction to both platforms, starting with KidneyLink. KidneyLink is an online portal available at kidneylink.ca that is designed to host a wide range of kidney research opportunities across Canada. This ranges from clinical trials to focus groups to surveys, to webinars, and other educational resources. So by visiting kidneylink.ca, users can create an account and sign up for access to our up-to-date listings of kidney research opportunities. And there's also a portal that we've set up for researchers and research staff to upload new study opportunities so as to leverage KidneyLink for enhanced study recruitment. Next slide, please. So we'll give you a look at how KidneyLink works once you're signed in. On the main page, there's a news feed of recent posts that can be filtered by various criteria. You can search only for research opportunities or for education or for news and events. You can filter by specific kidney disease areas, such as PKD, GN, dialysis, transplant, many others. Or you can search by specific study types, such as clinical trials, focus groups, etc. On the right side of the screen, we have an example of what an individual post would contain. It has a brief overview of the study, really high-level information about the level of commitment involved and what is requested of individual participants, and a direct link where you can contact the study coordinator to express your interest and learn more. Next slide, please. Next slide. Building the platform, we realized that it was important to not just build a large user base, but to keep them actively engaged and coming back to stay up to date on the latest postings. So what we do is curate the latest opportunities bi-weekly and make sure that they're distributed to our registered users via email. This is on an opt-in basis. Next slide, please. And so KidneyLink is focused on increasing awareness of where and how to get involved. And KidneyPro, on the other hand, is a new tool for educating patients and the public about the foundational aspects of health research and specifically kidney health research in Canada. So this is a self-directed online learning tool that provides an overview of research terminology, processes, the various roles that can be played by patients throughout the process, also including, very importantly, how to support respectful engagement between researchers and Indigenous peoples. And as well, it includes some tips and links for getting involved in research, one of which would be KidneyLink as well. Next slide, please. So the goal here is to equip patients and empower them to understand the roles that they can play and make sure that they're supported to take part actively and meaningfully throughout the process. Next slide, please. And here's a quick example of what KidneyPro looks like. The course is indexed into individual chapters that are listed on the left side of your screen there, and can be completed at your own speed in whatever order you prefer. We estimate that the entire module takes about 1 hour to complete. Next slide, please. And at the end of the module, there is a quiz that helps users to assess their own knowledge and reflect on the lessons of KidneyPro. Users are also able to download a certificate of completion that helps to signify their participation in the module. And it's worth mentioning that we have also recently launched a French version of the KidneyPro content that contains the full curriculum translated for our Francophone colleagues. And we are greatly indebted to Stephanie Lord-Fontaine from the Kidney Foundation of Canada, who was a key contributor to that translation effort, and we really greatly appreciate her contributions. In fact, KidneyPro in general is part of our training and mentorship committee, which has benefited greatly from the generous support of the Kidney Foundation of Canada, and we thank them for their ongoing support of Can-SOLVE CKD. Next slide, please. So we are still in the early stages, and we are still putting together a more robust evaluation strategy on how to assess the impact of these platforms, but we are able to share some very preliminary results based on the first few months of their operation. So we're still very much building our user base on both sides and trying to determine the real-world impact of these tools, but the initial engagement that we've seen has been very promising. We've had 279 users registered on KidneyLink to date, and our analytics show that the average user is spending almost 5 minutes on the site, which suggests that there is authentic engagement happening with the various posts and opportunities. On the KidneyPro side of things, we've had nearly 300 users launch the module and begin the training. And as mentioned, we are working on an evaluation strategy to help better assess completion rate and attitude changes resulting from the training. And we'll hope that we can roll that out in the coming months as we move forward with these platforms. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, we see KidneyLink and KidneyPro as being very promising strategies to increase both the volume and the depth of patient participation in research across Canada. And so our next steps will include raising greater awareness of both tools to build a larger user base, promoting ongoing engagement of those users who have already registered to take part in these tools, and also undertaking an evaluation of their performance to better quantify and express their impact. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Graham. That's wonderful. We'll move on now to our next presentation, which is entitled Enhancing Patient Care by Partnering with Patients in Kidney Health Research. Our presenters today are Anne McPhee and Hans Forster. Anne and Hans have been very energetic patient partners within Can-SOLVE CKD and play a key role in our community. They work on a number of projects, and most importantly, the Patient Governance Council that was mentioned earlier by Adir in the presentation. So Anne and Hans, I'll turn the microphone, so to speak, over to you.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. Hi, my name is Anne, and I'm presenting today with my teammate, Hans Forster. Our topic is Enhancing Patient Care by Partnering with Patients in Kidney Health Research. I've been a member of Can-SOLVE CKD Network for 3 years, but I've been involved from the first meeting in Montreal in 2014 with my dear friend Barbara Gay, who died from complications of end-stage kidney disease in 2017. Barb was blind from birth but I was her travel companion to all the Can-SOLVE meetings. Barb was one of the initial members who was there to get this wonderful organization up and running. Next slide. This is the e-poster we submitted and was accepted for the 2020 CSN conference. Today, Hans and I will take turns highlighting key sections of the presentation. We would like to acknowledge the other abstract presenters, Lee Getchell, Mary Bocage, David Hillier, and Graham Pollock for their support and input. Next slide, please. It all started with SPORE, Canadian Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research. From here, the members of the Canadian nephrology community came together with patient partners to form a national patient-oriented network called Can-SOLVE CKD. This is Canadians seeking solutions and innovations to overcome chronic kidney disease. We are doctors and researchers participating with patients to deliver better health outcomes. Next slide. Our objectives is to bring doctors, patients, and nephrology researchers together to transform treatment and care for Canadians living with or at risk for chronic kidney disease. Here are some of our Can-SOLVE CKD patient partners who are part of the network. We are patients who are on dialysis, some who have CKD who do not require dialysis, and others who have received kidney transplants. We also have extended family members, informal caregivers, and living donors on our Can-SOLVE CKD team. Now I'll turn this over to Hans.
Well, thanks, Anne. Good afternoon, and in the case of Tess Harris, good evening. My name is Hans Forster, and I am a patient partner. I have some qualifications in that I am a long-term home hemodialysis patient who has a career in research. So talking about Can-SOLVE is very dear to my heart. You've heard what Can-SOLVE is and who we are and what we hope to accomplish. And to reach those goals, Can-SOLVE, which was created in 2016, excuse me, and the meeting was held shortly thereafter to select projects that could be funded. That was that met the SPORE criteria of patient engagement. The process was truly innovative in that it involved patients, caregivers, researchers, and was used a number of criteria to select, which also involved presentations, booths, and piles of monopoly money of various colors. We don't have time today to go into it in detail, but it was a very exciting process. And anyway, this resulted in 18 projects, which were selected for funding and support out of a large number of contributions. And a brief description of each of these can be found on our website, cansolveckkd.ca. And what's unique about these 18 is that each one has at least one, and sometimes two, patient leads on their steering committee, as well as other patients integrated throughout the various stages of the project. Hence, patients have been fully integrated into the research teams, bringing an enhanced patient lens to bear on all aspects of the research life cycle. Yeah. Furthermore, patients are at the center of the network's governance model. Oh, I'm back one. Thank you. Patients are incorporated in the governance model, which is this thing here, and you can see that Patient Governance Council is in the blue at the top, and the Indigenous peoples the Indigenous Peoples Engagement and Research Council, or IPERC, is at the bottom, and you'll hear more about IPERC in the next presentation. But patients are at the center of it and form the central hub of the governance of the organization. The poster, next slide. The poster provides much more information about what the Patient Governance Council is all about, what our responsibilities are, and what we are, and who we are here. This little bunch of mugs up in this corner, and I suggest that you might read it at some point when you have an opportunity to do so. Next slide, please. And the results of all of this have been very positive. It's been rewarding for us, and that researchers have reported a positive impact of partnering with patients. We've heard such quotes as, "My research is better," as a result, and they brought a new perspective to the problem. And Brenda Hemmelgarn's quote of, "It's changed the way I do research. It's made me more aware and cognizant of what the patients are facing as priorities, and really tailoring the type of activities that we do to engage them." And it's been my personal experience that the more patients are engaged in research, the greater the acceptance of their inclusion by professional researchers, and hence the greater respect they achieve. So back to you, Anne.
Okay, thank you, Hans. Patient partners have been involved from the very beginning in all our 18 projects. In our poster, we selected 5 projects that exemplify the different ways patients are involved in research. These are iCare, a deprescribing study called Stop Med, the empathy trial, and a self-management intervention. You can read more about these projects on the Can-SOLVE website. For now, I will tell you a little more about the Living Donation Project. Next slide. The Transplant Ambassador Program, or TAP, is an intervention that was conceived and developed by patient partners. TAP ambassadors are dedicated volunteers who are kidney donors and kidney transplant recipients who go to dialysis units and talk with people who have questions about kidney transplantation. When you are going through a transplant, it can cause a lot of anxiety, and often dialysis patients, family members, and friends all benefit from talking to someone who has gone through the process. Or some people find it hard to initiate a conversation with a family member or a friend about a kidney donation. So it is good to speak to one of your peers who has gone through a similar experience. Currently, TAP is only in the province of Ontario, but they have plans to move into other provinces. To date, the ambassadors have had over 1,700 meaningful interactions in the clinics. TAP is an important program given that organ donation rates are not optimal and kidney transplantation can be life-saving. What makes this a unique project is that the patient partners lead the development of this innovative program as part of a solution to address a real-life problem. Next slide. We have witnessed a shift in the culture of nephrology research in Canada, paralleling the broader movement toward patient-oriented research. The traditional role of patients as research subjects has evolved to include patients as valuable and equal members of Can-SOLVE CKD's research projects. We are no longer research subjects, but patients in research as well. I will conclude, and I must say, it has been a privilege for Hans and I to be part of this cultural shift and feel like equal contributors to the research process. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And Hans, very much appreciate your presentation and insights into the patient engagement that's so much a part of Can-SOLVE CKD. Our next presentation is entitled Developing a Learning Pathway to Foster a Better Indigenous Cultural competence in Canadian healthcare research. The presenter is Craig Settee. Craig is an IPERC coordinator for Can-SOLVE CKD. Just as a reminder, IPERC stands for Indigenous Peoples Engagement and Research Council. Craig's originally from Winnipeg, but now resides in Vancouver on Coast Salish territory. His involvement with Can-SOLVE CKD follows from the previous presentation. He began as a patient in a patient partner capacity, having donated a kidney to his younger brother several years ago. So Craig, it's a pleasure for me to welcome you to talk to us about cultural competence, the Indigenous community in Canada.
Great, thanks a lot, Jim. Yeah, so this is our working group's presentation on Wabishke Bijigo Skanj, a learning pathway to foster better Indigenous cultural competence in Canadian healthcare and research. Next slide, please. So here's our e-poster that was submitted to the CSN AGM for this year, and I'll walk you through it over the next few minutes. At this time, I'll also acknowledge the Learning Pathway Working Group. They're also listed as the co-authors with this poster. Very much appreciate their guidance and support, and I want to say thank you, Chimi Gwetch, to all of my co-authors on this poster. Next slide, please. Just to give you a little bit of background, Can-SOLVE CKD is a kidney research network in Canada within which Indigenous patient partners, caregivers, researchers, and community leaders have created an Indigenous Peoples Engagement and Research Council, also called IPERC for short. An important reason for having a council like IPERC is that although Indigenous people make up approximately 4% of the Canadian population, chronic kidney disease affects our community at a much higher rate, unfortunately. And so for that reason, having IPERC involved and formed within the network is a really important step. Next slide, please. So here's a picture of IPERC at our last Can-SOLVE annual meeting, and we had also some guests who were involved in our IPERC meeting, so they're also pictured in here. But IPERC is made up of Indigenous patient partners, caregivers, researchers, community leaders, and we also have some knowledge keepers who are involved in our work. IPERC supports collaboration grounded in traditional values and partnerships with Indigenous communities. A key component of IPERC's work has also been the creation of a learning pathway called Wabishke Bijigo Skanj. Next slide. So the aim of the learning pathway is to enhance researchers' knowledge of racial biases, Indigenous voices and stories, and also the impact of colonization and culturally safe research practices. So I'll just tell you a little bit about, to go into that as well, as we have the logo here in the slide, and that logo was developed by Jesselyn King. She's also got a connection to Can-SOLVE through one of our members in IPERC. And the name Wabishke Bijigo Skanj was actually formed gifted to us in a pipe ceremony that we had with one of our knowledge keepers who resides in Manitoba. Next slide. So our method here, a working group, including members of Can-SOLVE CKD Network, Diabetes Action Canada, First Nations Health Authority in BC, as well as the Provincial Health Services Authority, the Indigenous unit in BC here is also part of that group, and also the First Nations Health and Social Secretariat of Manitoba has led the pathways development. Part of that is 2 in-person workshops were held in October 2017 and March 2018 to develop the concept and identity of the curriculum. And this photo is actually from that March 2018 meeting, and that's also Dan Thomas, who's in the middle, and some members of our working group. And that's where we had the pipe ceremony and the naming of the learning pathway. Next slide. So the result of this has become Wabishke Bijigo Skanj learning pathway. The curriculum consists of interactive learning exercises facilitated online modules and webinars. Several of the components of the pathway have been piloted, and feedback is being gathered via surveys, pledges, and stories. And so I'll just also note that as part of the development of this pathway, there were some trainings that already existed that were utilized in the pathway, and there are also a couple that where there were gaps found, and so the working group was tasked with kind of coming up with those. And so I'll just mention a little bit about some of the existing ones. So in the top left corner there is the Kairos blanket exercise. It's a participatory exercise that builds awareness of historic relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in Canada. Next to that, to the right there, is the Sanyas Indigenous Cultural Safety Training, and it's an online facilitated training program designed to increase knowledge, enhance self-awareness, and to strengthen the skills of those who work both directly and indirectly with Indigenous peoples. And I'll skip these next two because I'll talk about them in the next slides. And the one on the bottom left there is OCAP, and OCAP stands for Ownership, Control, Access, and Possession. And this is also an online training program that provides a comprehensive overview of the history of OCAP and its applications in research and information governance with respect to First Nations research and data. And then the last part is also kind of a continuation. It's a book club that we're also working on there. So next slide, please. So the stop after Sanyas in our learning pathway is the Indigenous Research Ethics and Protocols. And it's a 3-part webinar series examining Indigenous ethical principles of engagement with Indigenous peoples in health research. And these webinars were also created in partnership with Dr. Malcolm King, and he is the one who spoke to these webinars, and very thankful for all of the knowledge that Malcolm shares with us. And so the first webinar was called Understanding Indigenous Worldviews and Indigenous Research Ethical Principles. The second webinar was called Understanding the Historical and the History of Colonization and its Effect on Indigenous Health. And the third webinar is entitled Acquiring Skills for Respectful Engagement in Indigenous Communities. And at the bottom, in the footer there, you can kind of see a link, and that's a link to our YouTube channel that houses our webinars along with other webinars in Can-SOLVE. Next slide, please. And so after the webinar series, we have a learning marker that's on knowledge keepers and research that we're currently developing. And so Wabish Kebijigoskanj includes a focus on Indigenous knowledge keepers and research, a topic that's often been overlooked. This component of the pathway emphasizes the important roles and teachings of knowledge keepers, as well as how to foster meaningful and reciprocal relationships between researchers and Indigenous knowledge keepers. It was created through individual interviews and a gathering with knowledge keepers from several First Nation and Métis communities from numerous Canadian provinces. The information and teachings discussed during these events are being converted into a virtual booklet to help researchers, patients, and other Canadian healthcare partners understand the importance of traditional knowledge. And so in the slide here, there's a picture of the gathering that we held in October of last year. And from the interviews, these are the 7 strands, 7 themes that have come out of those interviews with the knowledge keepers. And so you know, you'll be able to see more when we have this virtual booklet prepared, and we'll look forward to having that work completed. Next slide. So the pathway's content is designed to help participants understand, recognize, and correct the racism that occurs in healthcare and research, in some cases caused by our own conscious and unconscious biases. So through enhanced knowledge, self-awareness, and strengthened cultural competency, Wabish Kebijigoskanj aims to support all partners in health research, healthcare and research to close gaps in health outcomes between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. And so these are some of the highlights of this learning pathway. Is at one of our Can-SOLVE annual meetings in 2018, we had a blanket exercise which had 70 70 plus participants there. We also have a number of network members and project teams engaging their research teams and some of their team members in SANYAS and OCAP trainings. And for the webinar series, we had 100 plus total participants over all 3 webinars who participated. And another important aspect of the work of Wabish Gibiji Goskanj is that in an Indigenous way of knowing and doing and being is that we understand that this pathway also has a spirit that's involved in the work. And so we, part of the working group's work involved in that is honoring that spirit. And so we do that annually at a Sundance ceremony in Manitoba. And there's a ceremony involved in there. That's a horse ceremony. So that's where we go and we offer some tobacco and cloth and some prayers for this learning pathway to continue to do the work that we're aiming for. So next slide. So Wabish Gibiji Goskanj represents a novel learning platform for Indigenous cultural safety and Canadian health research. While Wabish Gibiji Goskanj was developed in the context of kidney health, the learning pathway can be adopted by networks and institutions across Canada to help reduce and distill the racism that Indigenous people face within healthcare system and the research enterprise. And at the bottom there, we also have the website link to Can-SOLVE and some more information on the learning pathway. Next slide. And so that I'll say miigwech Pinanask Mitin, and in honor of living in Coast Salish territory, I'll say Haichka. Miigwech.
Thank you very much, Craig. That completes our presentations. You were reminded, of course, that the really ambitious goal of Can-SOLVE CKD was to transform kidney care, to transform it via research. And all of the presentations today focus on initiatives that are designed to transform kidney care, whether it be the introduction of important infrastructure, the engagement of patients, and really programs that develop cultural sensitivity for a marginalized and at-risk group of people in Canada. So I'd like to open it up to questions right now, and I'll ask for help from Selena and Amanda. I know that there are some questions that have been posed out there. Might I start with questions for Alicia? And please don't hesitate to unmute and ask your question. So Alicia, perhaps if I can begin, can you tell us I was struck by a couple of words in your presentation, and that was, those 2 words were nimble and responsive. Can you give us some insights into how quickly the newly structured CNTN was able to facilitate a multi-center response to CIHR for COVID-based research in kidney care?
Yeah, sure. So nimble in terms of the fact that because we do have these smaller groups, it's easier to kind of hone in the ideas because there aren't as many coming in. And I think that the group was really good about coming together, speaking through all their ideas to come to an idea. So for the CIHR grant, it feels like it wasn't very much time. I believe it was around 2 or 3 weeks. We had 3 or 4 phone calls and a lot of emails. And essentially what started out as a topic at a scientific operations committee meeting saying, do we want to maybe propose something for this granting opportunity, turned into a full-fledged proposal that was submitted to CIHR for their consideration. We don't know yet because it was delayed, so we won't find out till Monday, but it was really impressive just how quickly and how willing people were to give of their time to come and do this. Myself and Amanda were also on these calls, and Mila as well, to kind of help operationalize it, take notes and kind of collate things. But it was really amazing to see the group come together so quickly and be able to write something up. Dr. Clara Baum in Winnipeg did the bulk of that, and to get this all done within less than a month.
Thanks, Alicia. It sure demonstrates how the interconnectedness of the network works. Now, I understand Braden Mans has a question for Hans and Anne.
Yeah, I just read it. I think that there have been improvements in the system from the beginning to the end, principally because the patient partners at the beginning were really unfamiliar with the process and felt that their voices were perhaps unimportant to the conversations, that they were there, as a result of super tokenism of a sort. I think that most patient partners realized very quickly that that was not the case at all, and that in fact they were there in order to contribute, and they started doing that. It was, and the results, I think, have been, as I said in my little spiel, have been very positive. So the incorporation of patients has in itself made that easier to do in future. I know that in one of the projects that I was working on, there was a chap who I recruited into to join from my hospital, who was very reluctant to do it initially because he said, I know nothing about research. And we managed to convince him that it wasn't essential that he knows about research, because if they wanted researchers, they wouldn't have been asking patients. So, and he came in, and he's now a full-fledged, highly talkative contributor to the III project, and is in fact looking for more things to do within Can-SOLVE. And I think that that's happened across the board, showing the fact that we have almost 300 people who are interested in learning about research, and many of them are presumably patients, is probably a very strong indication that we're on the right track.
Thanks, Hans. Thank you. I know that Tess Harrison has joined us from the UK. She had a question for Graham in terms of the accessibility of the information that can be accessed through KidneyLink and KidneyPro. Can the international community link to that?
Certainly, yes. We we are obviously speaking primarily to a Canadian audience, but we have actually, in the case of some of the rapid response research initiatives that have been developed around COVID-19, we have posted several of those to KidneyLink with an international focus as well. And in the case of KidneyPro, although there is information about the Canadian health research context, I think much of the general health research terminology would be relevant to anybody who's looking to get into that area. So I hope that answers the question. I'll also just mention, I see Glenda Roberts has had a couple of attempts to have her question brought forward, so I'll do that on her behalf and just ask Alicia, in the context of the post-competition support program for scientific operations, if you could maybe give a little bit of information about how that works.
Yeah, so I was just actually typing to Glenda, but thanks for bringing that up. So we noticed that we did do a peer review, and we did not endorse the proposal, but we did offer that team support in terms of two of the researchers on our scientific operations committee offered to talk with them about our comments and potentially work through some of the noted issues. So I think that brought to light that maybe there could be more. We have a huge wealth of knowledge in terms of the people on our committee have submitted tons of grants, and they have so much knowledge about how to respond to CHR and how to respond to funders about their concerns. So we're still working through all the ways in which we can help them, but that was the first one we came up with. Some other ideas are maybe like having some sort of peer support where people could come to us with their questions that they got from CIHR and their concerns and how best to address them. So this is something we're going to be working on continually as people come to us and as we think of them, about ways that we can support people, because we all know that most of the time when you submit a grant, you're not going to get awarded, and but we want to help them be more successful the next time that they submit.
Thanks, Alicia. I think the COVID-19 response has been particularly critical. And Glenda, I did not ignore you. I had you queued. I'm sorry that it took a bit to get to you. May I ask Adira, just in one closing question, just as we approach 4 p.m., you had a question with regard to the learning pathway for Craig?
Yeah, Craig, if you can just maybe let the audience know how the learning pathway links to other initiatives in the Indigenous research space in Canada. I think that would be really interesting for us.
Sure. So I know even some of the trainings like OCAP are specific to First Nation experience, so it's not, doesn't speak to Métis and Inuit, but that's also, you know, First Nation experience across Canada. So that's developed in Alberta. And I think that even some of the partners from our working group are involved in other networks. So I think having folks from Finism in Manitoba involved, who are also involved in project work like Kidney Check in Manitoba, you know, that they're also involved in some of the eye care work with respect to bringing cultural competency and cultural safety into their project work. And one of the highlights that I was going to mention in my presentation too is that, you know, there's the 3 Indigenous focused projects within Can-SOLVE, but I think that there's also the work of Claire Bone with III, who has really embraced some of the learning pathway trainings with her group, and some of the patient partners who are involved in her project, who are Indigenous and a part of IPERC as well. As that, I think those linkages as well to not just Indigenous focused projects, but other projects that have Indigenous patient partners involved in their work is important to make that link.
Thank you, Craig.
Thanks so much, Craig. Well, just before I pass it over to Adira for closing comments, I just wanted to ask Braden to say a few words.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Adira, I think, would really want to be saying these words, but loss of Howard is really very fresh in all of our minds. But, you know, he was very dear to Adira, and so I wanted to just say a few words, and I was sorry that I wasn't able to attend the sharing circle yesterday. But I wanted to share a few memorable moments, and then I would just ask people to think of their own memorable moments with Howard. I mean, I remember Howard standing up at the mic at the CSN and speaking truth to all the members in the room. And for those of us with, you know, white fragility, it isn't always easy to hear those things, but Howard had a real gift of creating a safe space for us to have those conversations. I remember Howard's blue hair, and I guess now I remember his orange and green hair. And I'm sorry I never asked him why he had that bright hair. And I guess I always assumed it was because Indigenous people are often invisible, and I think Howard felt particularly invisible, and it was a response to that. But maybe it made me smile. Maybe it was just to make others happy. And I remember him thinking that this guy's had an amazing life, and my life has been so boring. He's had so many lives, actually. And I'll always remember Howard emphasizing the importance of all of us within Can-SOLVE and the patient councils and IPERC. That it was all important to work together to enable those with kidney disease to live the good life. So just take a moment and reflect on your happy memories of Howard. Over to you, Adira, if you're still able to close this out. If not, I can.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Thank you, Braden, and I think thank you everyone for your participation, not just in this poster session, this virtual poster session, all the work that went into all of the presentations, but more importantly, the true authentic commitment that everybody has to change, to changing the lives of people with kidney disease.
Thanks so much, Adira. I think it's an example where, as kidney researchers and physicians, we're so inspired and motivated by our patients, but always cognizant of the health risks that go along with chronic kidney disease. And indeed, those health risks, I think, drive so many of us to improve kidney care and improve patient outcomes. Listening to Braden speak so eloquently about Howard, I was one of those fragile white folks who first heard him in Montreal and was speak truth to us. And I think it was a truth that really struck to our core and opened up, I think, an awful lot of self-reflection as a Canadian and as a white person in Canada. So I'm grateful for him for that ability to speak to truth. Without question, he had an impact on many of us. So on behalf of DERA, I'd like to thank everyone for presenting, of course, Alicia, Graham, Anne, Hans, and Craig. And I'd like to thank so many of you for joining the webinar and allowing us to continue to pilot what seems to be the new normal. And we look forward as a group to many more opportunities to interact online. And of course, we're all looking forward to those opportunities to return to our more human side where we can interact in a face-to-face meeting. So in these COVID-19 times, please take great care, be careful, follow public health recommendations, be healthy, and stay safe. Thanks all.